So you were threatened with legal action by Nadhim Zahawi's lawyers for what is a very forensic scrutiny of his tax affairs. Can you just give us a summary of what happened there?
Sure. Back in July, there was noise around Nadhim Zahawi and his tax, so I looked into it. I was a tax lawyer for 25 years. I'm used to looking at companies, typically companies clients are going to buy, and seeing if there's tax problems in them. So I did that with YouGov and Nadhim Zahawi. And I discovered there were some very weird arrangements involving Zahawi's founder shares in YouGov being held not by him, but by a Gibraltar company owned by his father through an offshore trust. And his father provided no money to this company. YouGov says he did nothing, but he got the shares. And those shares ended up being worth something like 27 million quid.
Wow.
And when that 27 million quid got to Mr. Zahawi, we don't know how it did, but it seems that it did. I don't think he declared it to HMRC. I don't think he paid tax on it. And so I said back in July, I said that I thought he owed 3.7 million tax. And the reports now suggest that he had entered into a settlement with HMRC when he admitted owing 3.7 million of tax, plus interest, plus penalties. So, I was right, but he didn't say that in July. He didn't come to me and say, thanks, Dan. Yes, I missed this. Thanks for telling me I'm going to pay the tax. What he did was come out with excuses. And when I doubted those excuses, he sent lawyers to threaten me with libel if I didn't retract my claims.
Do you think that his statement that he's given, this public statement, which isn't very long, he just says there was some confusion over whether it was my father or I who owned these shares, and it was all just a legitimate confusion. I never attempted to deceive anyone, and now I've paid what I owe and it's done. Is that enough for you?
Well, here's the thing. So, first of all, on the timeline in his statement, not my words, his statement, he negotiated a settlement with HMRC for not having paid his taxes. He negotiated it whilst he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. The man responsible for the UK tax system negotiating his personal taxes with HMRC. I find that an extraordinary conflict of interest. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Second thing, he admits to having been careless. And that's why he would have been charged a penalty. There's reports he paid a 30% penalty, and he hasn't denied that. What does careless mean? So lots of people get their taxes wrong. Lots of people disagree with HMRC about their taxes. I acted for people who had millions of pounds riding on disagreements with HMRC. But normally, questions of carelessness don't arise, because if you get proper advice and you give your advisor decent information and you follow your advisor's advice, you haven't been careless. Even if you end up being wrong, and tax is complicated, it's easy to accidentally get things wrong, you haven't been careless. So if he's admitted being careless, it means he didn't get proper advice. What I think happened is that he got 27 million from this offshore arrangement, didn't get advice, didn't declare it, didn't pay tax. And if that's correct, then, well, I think he needs to consider his position very carefully. And if he knew that his taxes were wrong at the time that he was threatening me and at the time he was denying there was a problem, I think his position's unsustainable.
How did you come upon the story in the first place? And what was the email exchange between The Independent and Nadhim Zahawi?
Well, I heard about it from a couple of contacts back in July, that the Inland Revenue and the National Crime Agency were investigating Mr. Zahawi's financial and stroke tax affairs, and that it might involve offshore money. And so we got in touch with Mr. Zahawi, put a whole series of questions to him. First of all, he said he didn't know anything about it. And then when we continued to question him and put various matters to him and made it clear that we intended to publish the story, he said he would sue. So obviously we did our normal due diligence, went back to the sources, gave him a chance to reply, and we decided to publish two stories back in July. He didn't sue, he didn't make any complaint, but clearly he was just simply trying to use it to block the story. And as we can now see, it's all turned out to be true. He was being investigated, and he has had to pay back tax, and it turns out he's had to pay a penalty as well.
How important is it that reporters are free to report on matters of public interest? And what does it mean to a reporter on an editorial desk when they receive a letter or an email of the kind that Nadhim Zahawi decided to send you?
Well, I think in his case, it was just clearly an attempt to stonewall us and a blocking tactic. And of course, he's a politician. He's in the cabinet. He's chair of the Conservative Party. And obviously, it's the job of the free press to hold politicians to account. I mean, the Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, made a point of saying when he replaced Boris Johnson after all the falsehoods and other nonsense that went on with the Johnson regime, he made a point of saying he would be open and honest and transparent. And yet here we have the former Chancellor and Conservative Chairman who is clearly anything but transparent. And surely, to goodness, it must be a legitimate question for the public to ask what's going on when a Cabinet Minister has had to pay £5 million to the tax people that he didn't pay in tax, and a large part of it was a penalty. I mean, it's the sort of a standard of behaviour that shouldn't be allowed in public life.